The first snow of the season didn't fall like a celebration. It fell like a decision. Lena Hart stood at the edge of the highway outside of Briar Ridge, Montana. With her hazard lights blinking and her hands shaking so hard, she could barely keep her phone steady. The rental car's rear tire looked like it had given up on life somewhere between the city and whatever this wide, quiet nowhere was supposed to be. Her breath fogged the air. Her throat burned. She told herself she wouldn't cry anymore, not after the last month. Not after the humiliation of being escorted from her own office like she was a liability, not after the wedding photos that had popped up on her feed like a joke made by the universe. But she could feel it anyway. That hot pressure behind her eyes. The kind that said, "You can be strong in a conference room. Out here you're just a woman alone on the side of a road, with a suitcase full of clothes you don't recognize and a life you don't know how to carry." The first time she saw the ranch truck, she thought she was hallucinating comfort. A dark pickup rolled up behind her, slow and careful, tires crunching gravel. A man stepped out, tall and broad in a worn coat, a hat pulled low against the wind. He didn't rush at her. He didn't crowd her space. He paused a few feet away like he understood that some women needed room to breathe. "You all right?" he asked. His voice was deep, even. Not soft exactly, but not sharp. Like a fence post sunk right into the ground, Lena swallowed. "Flat tire." He glanced at the car, then at her, then back again. Like he was assessing more than rubber and road. "You got a spare?" "In the trunk," she said, and it came out smaller than she meant it to. He nodded once. "I can change it. I can—" She stopped herself. She could, technically. She'd watched tutorials during a brief phase of trying to become the kind of person who didn't need anyone. It hadn't lasted. The wind gusted, slapping her hair across her face. He moved toward the trunk, then paused again. "You mind if I open it?" That question, simple, respectful, hit her in a strange place. Like kindness had reached for her without grabbing. "No," she managed. "Go ahead." He opened the trunk, set her suitcase aside carefully like it mattered, then pulled out the spare and the jack. His hands were big and weathered, knuckles rough, movement steady. Every action looked practiced, reliable. Like he'd done this for strangers and neighbors and people who didn't deserve it. Lena watched him crouch beside the tire, the truck's headlights throwing a warm beam over the scene. For a moment, she could pretend the world hadn't been chewing her up for months. "You headed into town?" he asked, loosening the lug nuts. "Yeah," she said. "Briar Ridge." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That's where you are." She gave a weak laugh that surprised her by existing. He glanced up. His eyes were a clear, honest color gray-blue like winter sky. "You got people here?" Lena's throat tightened. "Sort of. Sort of doesn't sound like people," he said, but he didn't press. She watched the way his shoulders moved under his coat, the way he leaned into the work like he'd rather do something practical than talk. That suited her right now. Talking had become a dangerous sport. He lifted the car with the jack, swapped the tire out with quick efficiency, then tightened everything down. When he stood, he brushed snow from his hands and looked at her like he'd been taught to check for more than the obvious. "Cold?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, though the truth was she felt cold in places winter couldn't reach. He opened his truck door, grabbed a thermos, and poured something into a metal cup. He held it out without stepping closer. "Coffee," he said. "It's strong. Helps." Lena hesitated. Taking things from strangers used to be easy. Now it felt like a risk. But his face wasn't hungry. It wasn't expectant. It was just there. Present. She took the cup. Their fingers didn't touch, but she felt the heat anyway. "Thank you," she said, and her voice cracked like a cheap plate. He didn't react. Didn't look embarrassed for her. Didn't pretend not to notice. Just tipped his chin toward the road. "You need directions?" "I'm going to the old Hart place," she said before she could stop herself. "My aunt's, on Ridgeview." Something changed in his eyes' recognition, and something quieter behind it. "The yellow house by the cottonwoods." He asked, "Yeah." He nodded like that house was a fact of the landscape, like it belonged here the way he did. Road slick. Keep it slow. And don't drive on that spare like you're late to a meeting. That made her snort. Not late to anything anymore. The words slipped out and hung between them, honest and ugly. He studied her for a beat, then said, "Sometimes that's not the worst thing." Lena stared at him. He tipped his hat, then walked back to his truck. Before he climbed in, he looked at her again. "If you get stuck again," he said, "there's a feed store on Main. Ask for Eli. They'll know where to find me." "Eli," she repeated, like a name could be an anchor. He nodded once, then drove off, his taillights disappearing into the wide waiting prairie. Lena stood there with coffee warming her hands and a strange ache settling in her chest. She didn't know him. But for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely invisible. The Hart place looked smaller than she remembered. When Lena was 12, it had seemed like a kingdom wild grass, creaking porch steps, a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon, and soap, Aunt June moving around with flour on her hands and a song in her throat. Now it looked like a house that had been holding its breath. The porch light flickered when she flipped the switch. The key stuck in the lock like it was testing her. Inside, the air was cold and still. Dust floated through the beam of her phone flashlight. She set her suitcase down and stood in the entryway, listening to the silence. This was supposed to be a fresh start. That's what she told herself on the plane. That's what she told her mother when she called, voice tight and worried. But standing here, it felt less like a beginning and more like a retreat. She walked through the house, touching familiar surfaces, door frames, a chipped table, the back of an old chair. Her throat tightened when she reached the kitchen. Aunt June's apron still hung on a hook by the pantry. Lena's hands shook as she took it down, pressed it to her face and inhaled. It smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. "Okay," she whispered into the fabric. "Okay, I'm here." She had come because she had nowhere else to go. Because the city had become a glass box full of reminders. Because her ex-fiancé Daniel had been the kind of betrayal that didn't leave bruises, but left a permanent sense of foolishness. He had told her she was too intense, too driven, too much. Then he'd married the woman he'd been just friends with. And Lena had smiled through the congratulations messages and then quietly broke apart at her desk, alone because her job didn't have room for grief. A week later, she'd been encouraged to take a leave for burnout. 2 weeks after that, her position had been restructured. It was all very professional. It was all very final. She turned on the faucet. Water sputtered, then ran rusty for a moment before clearing. She stared at it, then laughed once, sharp and surprised. Even the pipes needed to cough out the past before anything clean could come through. By the time she unpacked a few essentials and found blankets in the hall closet, the sun was gone. The temperature dropped fast. The house creaked around her, settling like an old animal. She made a tiny fire in the fireplace, more for the light than the heat, then curled on the couch with her coat still on. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. "You made it?" Lena typed yes, "House is cold but fine." She didn't type the rest. "I'm scared. I'm tired. I don't know who I am without the life I built." She stared into the fire until her eyes blurred. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods like someone whispering secrets. And somewhere in the dark, a rancher named Eli was driving home, probably thinking about fences and feed and winter. Lena tried not to think about how safe he'd looked beside her broken tire. Tried not to think about how her chest had loosened just a little when he'd said, "Sometimes that's not the worst thing." But her mind didn't listen. Her mind had been starving for steadiness. The next morning, Briar Ridge greeted her with the kind of small-town clarity that made everything feel exposed. The main street was dusty even with snow along the edges, as if the town refused to be polished. Old brick buildings sat shoulder to shoulder, signs creaking gently in the wind. A diner with a red door and a hand-painted menu board looked like it had been there before Lena was born and would still be there when she was gone. She parked carefully, walked in and was hit with warmth and the smell of bacon. The diner was half full. Men in work coats. A couple of older women near the window. A teenage girl wiping tables with a bored expression. Behind the counter, a woman with silver hair piled on her head looked up. "Well, you're not from here," she said, not unkindly. Lena blinked. Is it that obvious? Honey, your scarf is city, the woman said, then smiled. Sit anywhere. Coffee? Yes, please. The woman poured coffee into a thick mug and slid it over like she'd been doing it her whole life. What brings you to Briar Ridge? She asked. Lena hesitated. In the city, that question was a trap. Here, it was a threat offered. I'm staying at the Hart place, she said. The woman's eyebrows lifted. June Hart's place? Lena nodded. I'm her niece. Something shifted in the diner. Not dramatic, just a ripple. Heads turned. Interest perked up like a dog hearing a familiar name. Well, I'll be, the woman said. June was a good one. Lena's throat tightened. She was. The woman softened. I'm Mabel. You need anything, you come here. Thank you, Lena whispered. Mabel nodded like gratitude was unnecessary. You eat? Lena realized she hadn't really eaten in days. I could. Mabel slapped a menu down. Breakfast fixes most things. Not all. All. But most. Lena managed a small smile. As she looked around, she saw the town's rhythm. The way people nodded at each other without thinking. The way conversations braided across tables. The way laughter wasn't rare. She also saw the way eyes lingered on her. Curious but not cruel. She was new even if she wasn't. She ordered eggs and toast and tried to relax. Then the bell over the diner door jingled, and her stomach did something strange. Eli stepped in, hat in hand, snow on his shoulders. He looked around once, then spotted her like he'd known she'd be here. He didn't smile exactly. But something in his face eased. He walked to the counter. Mabel. Eli, Mabel said with the warmth of a woman who'd fed him through half his life. You're late. Fence line, he said. Mabel snorted. Fence line's always your excuse. Eli's gaze flicked to Lena. Not intrusive. Just checking. You made it, he said. Lena nodded. Barely. He stepped closer, still keeping that respectful distance. Spare get you there? Yes, thank you. You get that tire fixed today, he said, like it wasn't a suggestion. Lena lifted her eyebrows. Bossy. His mouth twitched. Practical. Mabel's eyes darted between them like she was watching a show. Lena, this here is Eli Mercer. He's the kind of man who fixes things without being asked, and then acts like he didn't. Eli sighed. Morning, Mabel. Mabel smiled sweetly. Morning. Eli turned back to Lena. Hart Place furnace still acting up? Lena blinked. How would you know? June used to call me when it did, he said simply. I'd check it. She'd feed me pie like I was starving. Lena swallowed. It was really cold last night. Eli nodded. I can come by. Her heart did an uncomfortable flutter. You don't have to. He looked at her for a beat, then said, You're alone out there. Furnace matters. The way he said it, like her being alone was a fact he accounted for, made Lena's throat tighten again. Mabel slid a plate of food in front of Lena with a wink. Eat first. Then let the man do what he's good at. Lena stared down at her eggs like they held answers. She felt Eli's presence beside her, steady as the counter. Not pressing, not demanding. Just there. And she hated how much she wanted that. Because wanting things had gotten her hurt. Still, when Eli said, I'll be there around noon, she didn't stop him. She just nodded. Eli's truck pulled into the Hart driveway at exactly 12, like his life ran on a clock nobody else could hear. Lena had spent the morning trying to make the house feel less like a museum. She'd opened curtains, wiped counters, found a box of old dish towels that still smelled faintly like Aunt June's lemon soap. Now she stood in the doorway as Eli climbed out of his truck carrying a toolbox. He looked around at the property like he was reading it. Fence lines, roof, chimney, the lean of the old barn out back. You've got work ahead of you, he said. Lena let out a breath. I noticed. Eli stepped onto the porch, boots thudding on the wood. He paused in the doorway. May I? He asked, gesturing inside. Lena blinked again. That same respect. That same quiet permission. Yes, she said, stepping aside. He walked in, nodded once at the living room like he was acknowledging the house. then headed straight toward the hallway where the furnace closet was. Lena followed, arms wrapped around herself. He crouched, opened the panel, and immediately frowned. "Filters clogged," he muttered. "And this pilot light's barely hanging on." Lena leaned against the doorframe, watching him work. Eli moved like he belonged in problem-solving. Like his hands were calmer than his thoughts. She tried not to stare at the way his sleeves pulled tight across his forearms when he reached in. Tried not to notice the faint line near his jaw that looked like an old scar. Tried not to think about what kind of life put that kind of wear on a man and still left him gentle. After a few minutes, warm air began to whisper through the vents. Lena's shoulders dropped without her permission. Eli stood, wiped his hands on a rag. "That'll hold, but you'll want a proper service before deep winter." "I didn't even know who to call," Lena admitted. Eli looked at her like it was obvious. "You call me." The simplicity of it made her laugh once, breathy and disbelieving. "Is that how this town works?" "Sometimes," he said. They stood in the hallway, the house warming around them. The silence stretched, not awkward, just present. Lena cleared her throat. "Do you want coffee?" "I have coffee." "It might be terrible." Eli hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." In the kitchen, Lena fumbled with mugs, suddenly aware of every movement. She was used to hosting people in apartments with clean lines and polished conversation. This kitchen was older, softer, full of history. Eli sat at the small table like he'd done it before. "You knew my aunt well," Lena said, pouring coffee. Eli's gaze dropped briefly. "Yeah. She talked about you sometimes," Lena admitted. "Said you were stubborn." Eli huffed a quiet laugh. She wasn't wrong. Lena set his mug down. Their fingers brushed for half a second, and her whole body reacted like that touch meant something. Eli's hand stilled on the mug. His eyes flicked to hers, then away again, like he didn't trust himself to look too long. Lena's heart beat harder. She hated herself for noticing, for wanting. She sat across from him with her own mug, holding it like a shield. "So," Eli said after a moment, voice careful, "you planning to stay a while?" Lena stared into her coffee. "I don't know." Eli nodded like he understood not knowing. "Town'll talk." Lena's mouth twitched. "I noticed the staring at the diner." "That's just curiosity," Eli said. "They'll get bored when you don't give them a scandal," Lena snorted. "No promises." His eyes lifted, and for a second, something like humor warmed them. Then it faded, replaced by that grounded calm again. "You need anything fixed around here?" he asked. "Fence? Barn door?" Lena shook her head. "I haven't even looked." Eli nodded. "You should." Winter doesn't wait. The words could have been about more than the weather, and Lena felt it. Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Eli stood, moved toward it. When he opened it, an older woman in a church coat stood there with a bright smile and a casserole dish. "Well," the woman said, eyes shining, "if it isn't June's Lena." Lena froze. Eli stepped aside. "This is Mrs. Caldwell," he murmured quietly. "Church?" Mrs. Caldwell bustled in like she owned the air. "We heard you were back. Thought you might need something warm." Grief and cold houses are a bad mix. Lena's throat tightened again. "That's very kind." Mrs. Caldwell looked at Eli and smiled knowingly. "And of course Eli's here. That boy can't help himself." Eli's jaw tightened slightly. "Morning, Mrs. Caldwell." "Oh, hush," she said. "Now, Lena, we've got a potluck Sunday after service. You come. Let folks see you. Let them love you a little." June would want that. Lena didn't know what to say. Her instincts screamed to retreat, to hide, to avoid being seen. But Mrs. Caldwell's eyes were honest. "Okay," Lena said softly. "I'll come." Mrs. Caldwell beamed. "Good, and if you need anything, call me. Or Mabel, or anyone. This town will take care of you if you let it." Then she swept out as quickly as she'd arrived, leaving warmth and casserole behind. Lena stood in the doorway staring after her. Eli closed the door gently. "She always like that?" Lena asked. Eli's mouth twitched again. "Worse," Lena laughed, surprised by how good it felt. Then she looked at the casserole dish in her hands and felt a quiet ache. People were offering her things: food, help, a seat at a table. She didn't know how to receive without flinching. Eli's voice came low behind her. "You don't have to earn it here, Lena." She turned, startled. Eli's eyes held hers for a beat, then dropped. Like he'd said too much. Lena's chest tightened. For the first time since the city spat her out, she wondered what it might feel like to be somewhere that didn't require her to prove she deserved space. Days slipped into weeks with a kind of slow steadiness that made Lena's nervous system recalibrate. She got her tire replaced at the little shop on Main. The mechanic, a teenage boy with grease on his cheek, called her ma'am like she'd been 30 years older than him. He also asked if she knew how to drive in snow and looked horrified when she admitted she'd mostly taken Ubers. Eli taught her how to keep a shovel in her trunk, how to check the weather before leaving, how to tell the difference between pretty snow and dangerous snow. He did it without making her feel stupid. He showed up when the back porch steps sagged, when the kitchen faucet started leaking, when a window stuck halfway open, and she panicked at the thought of freezing overnight. Sometimes he came alone. Sometimes he brought a ranch hand Jesse, a lanky young man with a grin who liked to call Eli boss just to watch him scowl. And in the middle of it all, Lena found herself settling into routines she hadn't known she needed. Morning coffee at Mabel's diner, where Mabel would greet her like she'd always belonged. Afternoons at the feed store, buying birdseed because watching birds at the window felt like therapy she didn't have to pay for. Evenings in the Heart kitchen, trying to cook something other than toast. The town watched her, yes, but it also held her. And Eli quietly became the thread that kept pulling her back toward life. He didn't flirt like Daniel had. Didn't charm her with words. He offered her practical care, fixed hinges, carried firewood, made sure she had salt for the icy steps. Still, Lena noticed things. The way Eli's gaze lingered when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his hand would hover near her elbow when she stepped over ice, not touching unless she wobbled. The way he seemed to listen not just to her words, but to her silences. Lena hated the warmth blooming in her chest. Because warmth meant hope, and hope meant risk. One afternoon she found herself at Eli's ranch. It started with a calf. Mabel had told Lena the town was doing a charity auction at the winter fair. Local crafts, baked goods, a small livestock auction for the kids in 4-H. Lena, in an attempt to be a functioning human, had volunteered to help. Then she'd realized she knew nothing about livestock. "Go ask Eli," Mabel had said, like that solved everything. So Lena drove out to Mercer Ranch with her stomach tight and her pride already annoyed. Eli met her near the barn, wearing gloves and a heavier coat. His breath fogged as he spoke. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, not unkindly, just surprised. Lena lifted her chin. "Trying to be helpful." Eli's eyes narrowed slightly. "That can be dangerous." Lena rolled her eyes. "Mabel said you'd teach me about auction stuff." Eli's mouth twitched. "She volunteered you." "Yes." He nodded once. "All right. Come on." Inside the barn, warmth hit her. Hay, animals, the earthy smell of life. Horses shifted in stalls. A couple of ranch hands worked quietly in the background. Eli walked beside Lena, close enough to guide her, but not crowd her. "This is Jasper," he said, patting a horse's neck. The horse snorted like he had opinions. "He's grumpy, but he won't bite unless you deserve it." Lena blinked. "How would I deserve it?" Eli looked at her with the faintest hint of humor. "You'd find a way." She huffed a laugh. He led her to a small pen where a young calf stood, wide-eyed and uncertain. "This one's going to the auction," Eli said. "Kid's raising him." Lena stared at the calf, something tender stirring in her chest. "He's sweet." Eli's gaze softened slightly. "Yeah." Lena reached a hand toward the calf, hesitated. "Can I?" Eli nodded. "Slow." Lena moved carefully, fingers brushing the calf's fur. It was warm, alive. The calf leaned into her hand like it wanted comfort. Lena's throat tightened unexpectedly. Eli watched her, quiet. "What?" Lena asked, embarrassed by her own emotion. Eli's voice came low. "Nothing." But his eyes said, "I see you." Lena swallowed, pulled her hand back. This town has a weird way of making me feel things. Eli's jaw worked. That's what it does. They moved through the barn. Eli explained things in simple terms, how auctions worked, how to handle animals safely, what to watch for. Lena listened, surprised by how much she liked hearing him talk when he got practical. His voice stayed steady, but there was a quiet passion underneath it. Like the ranch wasn't just work, it was identity. At one point, she slipped slightly on a patch of packed snow. Eli's hand shot out, catching her elbow. Lena froze. His fingers were warm even through her coat. Strong. Steady. For a second, she felt something inside her crack open, a desperate relief at being held up, and not having to catch herself alone. Eli's gaze dropped to his hand on her arm. His grip loosened, but he didn't let go immediately. Lena's heart hammered. Eli's voice came rougher. Careful. I am, she whispered, but it sounded like something else. Eli's throat moved as he swallowed. He let go, stepped back like distance was necessary for survival. Lena stood there, breath shallow, feeling like she almost stepped off a cliff and didn't know whether she was grateful or furious. Thanks, she said, voice tight. Eli nodded once, eyes fixed on the ground. And in that moment, Lena realized something dangerous. Eli Mercer wasn't just being kind. He was fighting something. And she wasn't sure she wanted him to win. The winter fair arrived with lights strung across the town square, and the kind of cheerful chaos that made Lena feel like she walked into a movie she didn't belong in. Children ran between booths, faces red from cold and excitement. Someone played music near the center. The smell of fried dough and chili drifted through the air. Lena helped Mabel set up a table of baked goods, pies, cookies, cinnamon rolls. She wore Aunt June's old apron, tied around her waist like a quiet tribute. Mabel adjusted a display and nodded approvingly. Look at you, fitting in, Lena snorted. I'm still an outsider. Mabel waved a hand. Honey, outsiders are just future locals who haven't been gossiped about enough. Lena laughed. Then her gaze lifted and found Eli across the square. He stood near the livestock pen, talking to a ranch hand. His hat shadowed his face. His posture was solid, familiar, like he belonged to the land itself. Lena's chest tightened. She didn't look away fast enough. Eli's gaze lifted and met hers. For a second, everything else blurred: noise, lights, people. Just that look. Steady, quiet, watching. Lena swallowed, turned back to the table. Pretending her heart wasn't doing something reckless, Mabel leaned in, voice low. You like him? Lena almost dropped a tray. What? Mabel's eyes danced. Don't play dumb. I've been running this diner for 30 years. I can smell yearning like bacon grease. Lena's face heated. I'm not. Mabel soft. It's okay, honey. You've been hurt. Doesn't mean you're dead. Lena's throat tightened. She stared at the cinnamon rolls, blinking fast. Mabel patted her hand. Just don't let fear be the boss of you forever. Fear's a hungry thing. Lena swallowed hard. She didn't have an answer for that. Later, when the auction started, Lena stood near the pen with the crowd, watching kids lead animals forward. People called out bids. Laughter rose. The town felt alive in a way the city never had. Eli stood beside her at some point without announcement. Lena felt him before she saw him, like her body recognized his steadiness. Cold? He asked. A little, she admitted. Eli shrugged out of his coat and, without a word, draped it over her shoulders. Lena froze. His coat smelled like winter and hay and something warm underneath. She looked up at him, startled. Eli's eyes stayed on the auction, but his voice came low. Don't argue. Lena's breath caught. She swallowed. Okay. She pulled the coat tighter, feeling wrapped in him in a way that made her stomach twist. Eli stood close, not touching, but his presence was a wall against the wind. As the auction continued, Lena found herself leaning slightly toward him without thinking. At one point, she laughed at something a kid said, and Eli's gaze flicked down to her like the sound mattered. Lena looked up, caught his eyes. Something passed between them, quiet, heavy, and aching. Eli's jaw tightened like he was holding back words. Lena's chest hurt. She didn't know who moved first. All she knew was that later, after the fair lights dimmed and the town drifted home, Eli walked her to her car. Snow fell gently, catching in his hair and on the brim of his hat. Lena stood by the driver's side, Eli's coat still around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli nodded once. "Drive safe." Lena hesitated, fingers gripping the coat. "Eli." He looked at her, patient. Like he'd wait as long as she needed. Lena's voice trembled. "Why are you so good to me?" Eli's gaze dropped. His throat worked. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "Because you look like someone who's been carrying too much." Lena's eyes burned. Eli shifted closer, just enough that she could feel his warmth. His hand lifted, hovered near her cheek like he wasn't sure he had permission. Lena didn't move away. Eli's fingers brushed her hair back gently, like she was something fragile but not breakable. Lena inhaled sharply. Eli's voice came rough. "Lena." Her name in his mouth sounded like a promise he didn't trust himself to make. Lena's heart pounded. She stepped closer, closing the small space between them. Eli went still. Lena whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing." Eli's eyes held hers. "Neither do I." That honesty, simple, unpolished, and did her more than charm ever could. Lena's lips parted. "Then, just..." Eli's breath hitched. Lena didn't plan the words. They fell out of her like a confession. "Don't stop," she whispered. Eli's whole body tightened like the sentence hit a locked door inside him. His gaze searched her face, and in it, Lena saw restraint, hard-earned, deliberate. He didn't rush her. He didn't take. He waited, like choice mattered. Lena lifted her hand, touched his coat collar lightly, giving him the smallest pull. Eli exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't hungry, it wasn't rough. It was soft, almost surprised, like he'd expected the world to deny him this and it hadn't. Lena's eyes fluttered closed. Relief flooded her so fast her knees felt weak. Eli's hand slid to the small of her back, steadying her. Lena made a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time, something like surrender. Eli's mouth moved against her slowly, like he was learning her, like he was trying to memorize what it felt like to be wanted without being punished for it. Lena's fingers tightened on his collar. When he pulled back slightly, his forehead rested against hers. His voice came low, strained. "You sure?" Lena swallowed, trembling. "Yes." Eli's hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing lightly like he was calming her. He kissed her again, deeper this time. Still gentle, still careful, but with something breaking through. Lena felt herself tipping towards something she'd promised she wouldn't touch again. Trust. They stood under falling snow, wrapped in his coat and the quiet of the prairie, and Lena felt like she could breathe. Eli's mouth left hers and moved to her temple, his breath warm. He murmured, almost like he was talking to himself, "I've wanted to keep you safe since I saw you on that road." Lena's eyes filled. She turned her face into him. And when Eli's hand slid lower along her back, when his breath went rough again, Lena clung to him like she'd been starving for this kind of steady wanting. She whispered, half broken, "Don't stop." Eli went still again, then exhaled and held her tighter. His voice came low, firm, careful. "I won't, if you don't want me to." Lena shook her head, tears spilling. "I don't." Eli kissed her one more time, slow and sure. Then he pulled back, his eyes dark and conflicted in a way that made Lena's stomach twist. "Come inside," he said, voice rough. Lena nodded, heart hammering. She unlocked her door with shaking hands. Eli followed her inside. And the house, for the first time, didn't feel like it was holding its breath. Warmth changed everything. Inside the Hart kitchen, the heater hummed softly. The world outside disappeared behind frosted windows. Lena stood near the counter, Eli a few feet away, both of them suddenly unsure what to do with hands and breath and longing. Eli didn't move like a man trying to win. He moved like a man trying not to break something sacred. Lena's chest hurt with it. Eli's gaze held hers, then dropped to her mouth, then back up. "Lena," he said quietly, like he was testing if he was allowed to say it again. She stepped closer, closing the distance. Eli's breath hitched. Lena's fingers touched his coat sleeve, then slid up to his shoulder. She felt the solid shape of him, the warmth under layers. Eli's hand lifted and rested lightly at her waist, no pressure, just presence. Lena leaned into him. Eli bent his head, kissing her again, slower, deeper, still gentle. Like he was proving to her and to himself that wanting didn't have to be dangerous. Lena's back pressed lightly against the counter. Eli's hand slid to the small of her back again, anchoring her. Her heartbeat felt loud in her ears. She didn't want to think. She didn't want to remember Daniel's lies or the way the city had made her feel disposable. She wanted this. She wanted the way Eli's restraint felt like respect. Eli's mouth moved against hers, and Lena breathed into him, letting herself soften. His forehead pressed to hers again, his voice low. "If this is too fast." "It's not," Lena whispered, and the words were true in her bones. Eli's jaw tightened. His eyes shut briefly like he was fighting something. When he opened them, his gaze looked almost pained. "Lena," he said again, and this time there was warning in it. Her stomach tightened. "What?" Eli swallowed. His hands dropped away from her waist like he'd been burned. He stepped back a full pace. Lena's heart lurched, fear rushing in like cold air. Eli stared at the floor, breathing hard. "What is it?" Lena asked, voice shaking. Eli's voice came rough. I can't keep going like this without telling you something." Lena's chest tightened. Her hands curled into fists. "Tell me." Eli looked up. His eyes held regret. "I'm married," he said. The words hit Lena like a slap. For a second, she couldn't hear the heater. Couldn't feel the warmth. Couldn't even feel her own body. All she felt was the familiar sensation of humiliation rising like bile. Her voice came out thin. "What?" Eli's jaw clenched. "I'm married. On paper." Lena's laugh was sharp, broken. "On paper." Eli flinched slightly, like he deserved her tone. "You let me." Lena's throat tightened. Her eyes burned. "You kissed me." "You came into my house." Eli's shoulders looked heavier than before. "I know." Lena shoved his coat off her shoulders like it was suddenly poison. She wrapped her arms around herself, shaking. "This is..." She swallowed hard, the word again pounding in her skull. "This is exactly..." Eli's voice cut in low. "I'm not living with her." Lena's laugh came out ugly. "That's your defense?" Eli stepped forward, then stopped himself, keeping distance like he knew he'd lost the right to be close. His voice stayed steady, but his eyes looked raw. "Lena, listen, I haven't been with her in a long time. We're separated." Lena's breath came fast. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Eli's throat worked. "Because I'm ashamed." The word landed heavier than excuses would have. Lena stared at him, chest heaving. "Ashamed of what?" "Of being married? Of kissing me? Of letting me think." Eli's gaze dropped, then lifted again. His voice came quieter. "Ashamed of how it ended. Ashamed of how I handled it. Ashamed that I'm still tied to a thing that failed." Lena's hands shook. The room felt too small, too warm, too much. She stepped away from him, toward the hallway like she needed escape routes. Eli stayed where he was, not chasing her. That somehow hurt more, like he expected her to leave. Lena's voice cracked. "You should have told me before you ever touched me." Eli nodded once, slow. "You're right." Silence stretched, full of the things Lena didn't want to remember. The way Daniel had smiled at her while lying. The way she'd felt stupid for trusting. Lena's eyes filled. "I can't do this," she whispered. Eli's voice came low, careful. "I won't ask you to." Lena stared at him, angry tears spilling. "Then why did you come here?" Eli's jaw clenched. His eyes looked like he hated himself. "Because when you said don't stop," I wanted to be the kind of man who deserved those words. Lena's chest tightened painfully. Eli's voice dropped even lower. "But wanting doesn't make me free." Lena's throat burned. She turned away. pressing her palm to the wall as if the house could hold her up. Eli didn't move. He didn't beg. He didn't explain himself into heroism. He just stood there, taking the consequences. Lena wiped her face hard. "Leave," she whispered. Eli's breath hitched. He nodded once. "I will," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." He grabbed his hat, then paused at the door. His voice came rough, restrained. "If you ever want the truth, all of it, you can ask. I won't hide again." Then he walked out into the cold. The door shut softly behind him. And Lena slid down the wall onto the floor, shaking so hard she couldn't breathe. Because the worst part wasn't that he was married. The worst part was that she believed for a few minutes that she'd finally found someone safe. For 3 days, Lena avoided town. She didn't go to Mabel's diner. She didn't answer her phone when her mother called. She didn't open the curtains. She stayed in the Hart house with her grief and her anger and the ugly, humiliating echo of her own whisper. "Don't stop." She replayed everything. Eli's steady hands fixing her furnace. His coat around her shoulders. His careful question, "You sure?" The respect. The restraint. And then, "I'm married." She felt foolish, she felt used. But beneath all that, something else gnawed at her. Something she didn't want to admit. Eli hadn't acted like a man trying to collect a conquest. He'd acted like a man trying to hold himself back from something he wanted too much. And that didn't excuse him. But it complicated her anger in a way she resented. Resented. On the 4th day, there was a knock at the door. Lena froze, heart hammering. Another knock. Then a voice. "Lena?" "It's Mabel." Lena closed her eyes. She didn't want to see anyone. She didn't want to be looked at with pity or curiosity. But Mabel knocked again, persistent. Lena dragged herself up and opened the door a crack. Mabel stood there holding a paper bag that smelled like biscuits. Her eyes took Lena in, pale, exhausted, raw and softened. "All right," Mabel said, voice gentle. "You look like you've been chewing glass." Lena swallowed, throat tight. "I'm fine," Mabel snorted. "No, you're not. Move." Before Lena could protest, Mabel pushed past her into the kitchen, set the bag down, and started unpacking food like she owned the place. Lena stood by the door, stunned. Mabel turned, hands on hips. "You want to tell me what happened?" Lena's throat tightened. "No," Mabel's gaze held hers steady. "Honey, the town's already talking. I'd rather hear it from you." Lena's hands shook. "It's not, I don't." "It doesn't matter what they think." Mabel's voice softened further. "It matters what you think." Lena swallowed hard. The words pressed against her ribs like they needed out. "He kissed me," Lena whispered. "And then he told me he's married." Mabel went still. For the first time, she looked genuinely surprised, then angry. "That stubborn man," she muttered. Lena's eyes filled. "I'm an idiot." Mabel snapped her gaze back to Lena. "Don't you dare." Lena's voice broke. "I should have known." "I should have." Mabel crossed the room and took Lena's face in her hands, forcing her to look up. "Honey," she said, fierce and kind at once. "You didn't do anything wrong by wanting someone. You didn't do anything wrong by believing a man who acted decent." Lena's tears spilled. Mabel's voice went quieter. "Eli's situation is complicated. Doesn't make it okay. But it's not what you think." Lena blinked. "What do you mean?" Mabel sighed, releasing her. "I'm not going to tell you his story like it's gossip. That's his to tell. But I will tell you this, Eli's not Daniel." Lena flinched at the name. "You don't know Daniel." Mabel's gaze stayed steady. "No. But I know the look in your eyes. And I know Eli Mercer's heart. He doesn't play with people." Lena wiped her face, shaking. "Then why did he let me?" Mabel's jaw tightened. "Because he's lonely. Because he's human. Because sometimes men with good hearts still make stupid choices." Lena stared at the table, chest aching. Mabel set a biscuit in front of her like an offering. "Eat. Then decide what you want." Lena swallowed, voice small. "I want to not feel like this." Mabel's expression softened. "Then you're going to have to let him talk." Lena's breath caught. "I don't know if I can." Mabel squeezed her shoulder. You don't have to decide forever today. Just decide the next right thing. When Mabel left, Lena sat at the kitchen table staring at the biscuit. The house felt too quiet. And in the silence, Lena realized something that scared her more than betrayal. She missed Eli. Not his hands fixing things. Not his coat. She missed the feeling of being seen without being judged. That feeling had cracked something open in her. And she didn't know how to close it again. If you're pulled into this slow burn the way Lena is, subscribe so you don't miss the rest of our prairie heartbreak and healing. Eli didn't come back to the Hart house. Not once. That restraint respecting her leave should have made Lena feel powerful. Instead, it made her feel hollow. A week passed. Then another. The first big snowstorm hit hard, burying the town in white. The Hart driveway became adrift. Lena shoveled until her arms shook and her lungs burned. She fell once, landing on her knees in the snow, breath knocked out of her. And she found herself thinking, absurdly, Eli would have been here already. He would have done this without asking. He would have made sure I didn't fall. She hated that thought. She hated that she wanted him. On Sunday, Lena forced herself to go to church because Mrs. Caldwell would probably show up at her door with a hymn book if she didn't. The small church was warm and crowded. People greeted her kindly. Some hugged her like she belonged. Some stared a little too long. Lena kept her smile polite and her heart guarded. Eli sat 3 rows ahead alone. He didn't turn when she entered. But Lena saw his shoulders shift slightly, like he felt her presence anyway. During the service, Lena tried to focus on the songs, the words, the comforting rhythm. But her eyes kept drifting to Eli's profile, the set of his jaw, the stillness of him. He looked tired, like a man who'd built a life around carrying things and never putting them down. After service, the potluck happened in the church hall. Tables overflowed with casseroles and pies. Church ladies moved like a coordinated team. Lena tried to blend in. Then Mrs. Caldwell swept up to her, eyes sharp. Where have you been hiding, child? Lena forced a smile. Busy. Mrs. Caldwell narrowed her eyes. Busy being sad? Lena swallowed. Maybe. Mrs. Caldwell sighed and patted her arm. Well, come sit. Eat. Lena sat at a table with Mabel and a few others. Conversation bubbled around her. The town talked about weather rodeo plans whose kid got into college. Lena listened, smiled, tried to feel normal. Then a chair scraped behind her. Eli sat down. Lena's breath caught. He didn't look at her immediately. He set his plate down, hands steady despite the tension in his shoulders. The table went quieter, not silent, but curious. Like the town could smell a storm. Eli finally lifted his gaze to Lena. His eyes were raw around the edges, like he hadn't slept well. Lena, he said quietly. Lena's throat tightened. Eli. Silence stretched. Mabel cleared her throat loudly. Well, I suddenly remembered I need to check on the dessert table. The others followed her lead like a practice dance, standing, drifting away, leaving Lena and Eli alone at the table with a room full of people pretending not to listen. Eli's jaw tightened. He looked down at his hands. I shouldn't have come, Lena whispered, voice shaking with old fear. Eli's gaze lifted. You don't have to stay, but I needed to see you. Lena swallowed hard. Why? Eli's voice went rough. Because I've been respecting what you asked. And it's been eating me alive. Lena stared at him, heart pounding. Good. Eli flinched slightly like he deserved that. He nodded once. Yeah. Lena's hands shook. She hated how much she wanted to cry. Eli's voice lowered. I'm not asking you to forgive me today. But I'm asking, can I tell you the truth? All of it. Lena's chest tightened. She glanced around people eating, laughing softly, pretending this wasn't happening. Lena's voice came thin. Here? Eli's jaw worked. No, not here. He hesitated. There's a bench behind the church. It's quiet. Lena's pride screamed to say no. To stand up and walk away and keep her heart safe. But Mabel's words echoed. Decide the next right thing. Lena whispered. Okay. Eli stood first, giving her room. Lena followed him out into the cold. Behind the church, A wooden bench sat half buried in snow. Eli brushed it off with his glove before she sat, another small act of care that made her chest ache. They sat with space between them, breath fogging the air. Eli stared at the snowy ground. "My wife's name is Claire," he began, voice low. "We married young, high school sweethearts." Thought that meant something would always work if you tried hard enough. Lena stayed silent, throat tight. Eli's jaw clenched. She wanted out of this life. Ranch, town, all of it. I kept promising her it would get easier. It didn't. He swallowed. We tried. We really did. But eventually, she left. Lena's chest tightened. "Then why are you still married?" Eli's breath hitched. "Because I didn't sign the papers when she asked." Lena blinked. "Why?" Eli's gaze finally lifted, and in it Lena saw something like shame so deep it was carved into him. "Because my dad left," Eli said quietly. "Packed up, walked out, never came back. And I swore I wouldn't be that man. I swore I wouldn't quit." His hands clenched on his knees. "So when Claire left, I told myself it wasn't over. That if I just worked harder, fixed more, proved something, she'd come back." Lena's throat tightened painfully. Eli's voice dropped even lower. "She didn't." Silence pressed in around them, heavy. Lena whispered, "So you've been waiting." Eli nodded once, barely. "For too long." Lena's hands shook. "And you kissed me anyway." Eli's eyes closed briefly. "Yes." Lena's voice cracked. "Why?" Eli's gaze stayed on hers now, steady and broken. "Because you felt like hope," he said quietly. "And I didn't realize how starving I was until I tasted it." Lena's breath caught. Eli swallowed. "That's not an excuse. That's the truth." Lena stared at him, tears freezing at her lashes. "You should have told me." Eli nodded once. "I know." He stared down again. "I was afraid you'd look at me like I was tainted, like I couldn't be good enough." Lena's throat tightened around a bitter laugh. "You were afraid?" "Eli, I'm the one who got blindsided. Again." Eli's voice came rough. "I know, and I hate myself for putting you there." Silence stretched again. Lena's chest hurt with competing emotions, anger, empathy, longing, fear. She whispered, "Do you love her?" Eli's jaw tightened. He thought for a moment, like he refused to lie. "I loved who we were," he said finally. "I loved the promise of it, but I've been alone a long time, Lena. And what I feel now, it's not love, it's guilt. It's habit. It's me not knowing how to let go without feeling like I am becoming my father." Lena's eyes filled. Eli's voice softened, stripped bare. "I don't want to be a man who hides behind paper. I don't want to be a man who uses loneliness as an excuse. I want to be someone you can trust." Lena's breath trembled. Eli turned his head slightly, not forcing eye contact, like he was giving her freedom to run. "If you tell me you never want to see me again," he said quietly, "I'll live with that. I earned it." Lena stared at him, heart cracking. She wanted to hate him, but he wasn't denying her pain. He wasn't blaming her. He was sitting in it with her, taking the weight. And that did something to her. Lena whispered, "What happens now?" Eli's voice came low. "Now, I do the right thing. I file. I finish what should have been finished, not because I want you. Because it's the truth." Lena swallowed hard. "And if you do that, what are we?" Eli's throat worked. "If you're willing, we start over, slow, clean, no secrets." Lena's chest tightened. "I don't know if I can trust you." Eli nodded once. "That's fair." He hesitated, then added softly, "But I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me to." The line hit Lena like a hand on her back when she was falling. She stared ahead at the snowy field behind the church. Her voice broke. "I'm so tired of running." Eli's body went still, like he was listening with his whole soul. Lena whispered, "I thought I was strong. And then everything fell apart. And when you held me up, it felt like I could breathe. And that terrified me." Eli's voice came low, simple. "You don't have to carry this by yourself anymore." Lena's breath shook. Tears spilled again. Eli didn't reach for her. He didn't take advantage of her softness. He just sat there, close enough to be warmth, far enough to be safe. After a long moment, Lena whispered, "Okay." Eli's head turned slightly. "Okay, what?" Lena swallowed, voice trembling. "Okay. Tell me the truth from now on." "And do what you said?" Eli's breath hitched. "I will." Lena's voice cracked. "And I'll..." "Try, not promise, try." Eli nodded once, like he understood the size of that word. "Thank you," he said quietly. They sat in silence, breath fogging, the town behind them humming with life. And for the first time in a long time, Lena didn't feel like she was choking on her own fear. Eli filed the papers 2 days later. Lena didn't go with him. She didn't need to witness it to know it happened. News moved fast in Briar Ridge. Mabel told her over coffee with a look that said, "I'm proud of both of you, but I will deny it if you repeat it." The town predictably buzzed. Church ladies whispered. Ranch hands muttered. Mrs. Caldwell sighed dramatically like she'd been waiting for this plot twist for years. Lena tried not to let it crush her. She focused on what she could control. She worked on the hard place, clearing out old boxes, fixing up the spare room, starting a small project in the barn that Aunt June had never finished. A little corner meant for baking and crafts, a space that felt like possibility. Eli didn't push. He showed up when something needed doing. Snow drifted too high, a pipe froze, the barn door jammed. But he kept his distance emotionally, as if he was proving he could be steady without being entitled. Sometimes he'd stay for coffee at the kitchen table. Sometimes he'd leave right after fixing the problem. Sometimes Lena caught him watching her with that quiet ache in his eyes, and she felt something soften inside her. But she didn't let herself rush. She'd rushed once, in the city, into a life that looked perfect on paper. She wasn't doing that again. One evening, Lena found Eli in her driveway, standing beside his truck, staring at the snow like it held answers. He looked up when she approached, his face tense. "Everything okay?" Lena asked. Eli hesitated. Claire called. Lena's stomach tightened. "And?" Eli's jaw clenched. "She's coming into town. Wants to talk." Lena's chest tightened painfully. Fear rose like smoke. Eli watched her carefully. "I'm telling you because I promised. No secrets." Lena swallowed hard. "Do you want to talk to her?" Eli's gaze went distant. "I don't know. Part of me wants to hear her say I wasn't the only one who failed. Part of me doesn't want to reopen it." Lena's hands shook. "What does she want?" Eli's voice went low. "She wants to make sure I'm serious about ending it." Lena's throat tightened. Eli's gaze held hers. "I am." Lena breathed shakily. "Okay." Eli hesitated, then said quietly, "You don't have to be involved." "This is mine." Lena nodded, though something in her chest ached. Eli's voice softened. "But I'd be lying if I said I didn't want you to know I'm choosing the truth." Lena's eyes burned. She whispered, "I don't want to lose you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Eli went still. His voice came rough. "Lena." Lena swallowed hard, embarrassed by her own honesty. "I'm not saying I'm not." Eli stepped closer slowly, careful, like approaching a skittish animal. He stopped just in front of her, not touching. His voice was low and steady. "You feel like the only place I can breathe." Lena's breath hitched. Eli's gaze searched her face. "But I'm not asking you to hold that for me. I'm just telling you the truth." Lena's eyes filled. "What do we do with this?" Eli's voice came quiet. "We keep choosing right." Lena nodded shakily. Eli's hand lifted, hovering near her cheek again. He waited. Lena leaned into his hand this time, giving him permission without words. Eli's thumb brushed her cheek gently, wiping away a tear. His voice came low. "I'm here," Lena whispered. "If you stay." Eli's eyes held hers. "If you stay, I stay." And in that moment, Lena felt the ground under her shift into something steadier. Not certainty, but hope with roots. Tell me in the comments. If you were in Lena's boots, would you trust him yet? Claire arrived on a gray afternoon. Lena saw her truck outside Mabel's diner and felt her stomach drop. Claire was prettier than Lena expected, not in a sharp, city-polished way, but in a clean, composed way. Brown hair in a neat braid, coat fitted, eyes alert. Lena didn't go inside. She sat in her car down the street, hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles ached. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She told herself this wasn't a competition. But old wounds didn't care about logic. Old wounds only cared about patterns. Man chooses someone else. Man hides. Woman looks foolish. Her breath shook. After 20 minutes, Eli stepped out of the diner. Claire followed. They stood on the sidewalk. Claire spoke with her hands, controlled and precise. Eli stood still, hat in hand, shoulders tense. Lena couldn't hear the words, but she saw Eli's jaw clench, saw him rub a hand over the back of his neck like he was carrying something heavy. Then Claire reached out and touched his arm. Lena's chest tightened painfully. Her mind screamed, Of course she can touch him. She's his wife. Lena's throat burned. She started her car without thinking, drove away before she could see more. By the time she got back to the Hart house, her hands were shaking. She slammed the door harder than necessary. She paced the kitchen like a trapped thing. When the knock came an hour later, Lena froze. She didn't want to answer. But the knock came again, gentle, not demanding. Lena? Eli's voice. Her chest tightened. She walked to the door and opened it. Eli stood on the porch, face drawn, eyes tired. He held his hat in his hands like a man asking permission to exist. Lena's voice came out brittle. So? Eli's gaze held hers, steady. So? Lena's chest hurt. Did she change her mind? Did she want you back? Eli's jaw tightened. No. Lena swallowed hard, hating how much she needed the answer. Then why did she touch you? Eli blinked, surprised by the question. Then his mouth tightened like he understood. She was saying goodbye, he said quietly. She was apologizing. In her way. Lena's throat tightened around a bitter laugh. Convenient. Eli's eyes stayed on hers. Lena, I came because I could feel you pull away. Lena's hands shook. I'm trying not to be stupid. Eli's voice went low. You're not. Lena's eyes filled. I watched her with you and it felt like I was right back in my old life. Watching a man choose someone else while I stood there like an extra in my own story. Eli's jaw clenched. He stepped closer, but stopped short of touching. His voice came quiet, stripped down. I'm sorry that happened to you. Lena wiped her face hard. You don't get to say that like you didn't just... Eli's voice cut in, firm but not loud. I'm not choosing her. Lena froze. Eli's eyes held hers with a steadiness that made her chest ache. I chose the truth, he said. I chose to end it. I chose to stop hiding behind guilt. His voice roughened. And I'm choosing you, if you'll have me, not in secret. Not half, not as a mistake. Lena's breath shook. I'm scared. Eli nodded once. I know. Lena's voice cracked. What if you wake up one day and decide you want the life you almost had with her? Eli's gaze didn't waver. That life is gone, and I don't want it. He swallowed. What I want is a home that feels honest. A person who feels like peace. Lena's eyes burned. Eli's voice softened further. You! Lena stared at him, heart breaking open. She whispered, I don't know how to do this without getting hurt. Eli's hand lifted slowly and, this time, he reached for her careful, asking without words. Lena didn't move away. Eli's hand settled at her waist gently, steadying her like he always did. His voice came low. Then we do it slow. And if you need space, I'll give it. If you need proof, I'll show it. He hesitated. I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me to. Lena's breath hitched. She stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest. Eli went still, then exhaled and wrapped his arms around her, not crushing, just holding. Lena closed her eyes and let herself be held. For a long moment they didn't speak. They just breathed. And the fear inside Lena didn't vanish. But it quieted, just enough for her to feel something else. Chosen. Spring came slow. like it had to be convinced. Snow melted into mud. The prairie shifted from white to brown to the first stubborn green. Lena found herself laughing more, sleeping better, eating real meals. She started baking again, using Aunt June's recipes. She brought pies to Mabel's diner, and Mabel started selling slices with a sign that said, June S. Girls Pie Limited. The town loved it. Lena pretended she didn't. Eli and Lena fell into a rhythm. He'd show up in the evening after ranch work, boots muddy, shoulders tired. Lena would hand him coffee and he'd sit at her kitchen table like it was becoming his. Sometimes they talked about nothing weather, fences, which Horse threw a fit. Sometimes they talked about everything, fear, shame, what home meant when you'd lost it once. Eli didn't become suddenly talkative. He stayed quiet. But when he spoke, it mattered. One night, after a long day where Lena had nearly snapped at a leaking pipe and then cried because she was exhausted, Eli found her on the back porch steps. She sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the dark. Eli sat beside her without a word. They stayed like that for a long time, silence heavy but not lonely. Finally, Lena whispered, I hate that I still feel broken. Eli's gaze stayed on the yard. You're not broken. Lena laughed weakly. Feels like it. Eli's hand moved slowly, resting over hers where it gripped her knee. Warm. Solid. He didn't squeeze hard. Just held. Lena's breath trembled. Sometimes I think, if I was less intense, maybe Daniel wouldn't have. Eli's voice cut in, low and firm. No. Lena blinked, startled by the sharpness. Eli turned his head slightly, eyes steady. Don't do that. Lena's throat tightened. Do what? Make his betrayal your fault, Eli said quietly. That's a lie. And it'll rot you from the inside if you let it live there. Lena's eyes filled instantly. Eli's hand stayed over hers like an anchor. His voice softened. You're allowed to be intense. You're allowed to want things. You're allowed to take up space. Lena's tears spilled. Eli didn't wipe them away this time. He just stayed, close, steady, letting her have them. Lena whispered, I'm scared you will see me ugly and tired and decide I'm too much. Eli's jaw tightened. His thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles. His voice came low, almost broken. Lena, you don't scare me. She turned her face toward him, trembling. Eli's gaze held hers. The only thing that scares me is losing you because I didn't say what mattered. Lena's breath hitched. Eli swallowed hard, eyes glistening in the porch light. I spent too long being a man who kept everything locked up, he said quietly. I thought that made me strong. It just made me lonely. His voice roughened. And then you showed up, and I realized I don't want to be lonely anymore. Lena's chest cracked open. Eli's hand tightened gently. You don't have to carry this by yourself anymore. Lena's lips trembled. Eli. Eli leaned closer, pressing his forehead to hers. His voice was barely above a whisper. If you're here, I'm here. Lena's breath shook. She whispered, I choose you. Eli froze for half a second, like the words were too precious to touch. Then he exhaled, shaky, and pulled her into him. He held her like he meant it. Like he wasn't going to let go unless she asked. And for the first time, Lena believed him. By the time the rodeo weekend rolled around, Briar Ridge felt like it had fully claimed her. Mabel called her our Lena. Mrs. Caldwell recruited her for church bake sales. Jesse teased her like she was a little sister and called her boss lady when she told him to stop tracking mud into the Hart kitchen. Eli watched it all with quiet pride, like he couldn't believe she was real. On rodeo Saturday, Lena stood near the arena fence with Eli beside her. The crowd cheered. Dust rose. Music played. Lena leaned into Eli's side slightly, comfortable now. Eli's arm settled around her shoulders, casual but protective. She looked up at him. You okay? Eli's mouth twitched. Yeah. Lena narrowed her eyes. That's not your honest face. Eli huffed quietly. I'm fine. Lena smiled. Liar. Eli glanced down at her, eyes soft. I'm not used to this. This? Lena asked. Eli's gaze moved over the crowd, then back to her. Being happy. Lena's chest tightened. She slid her hand into his. Eli's fingers curled around hers immediately, like he'd been waiting for permission. Lena whispered, "Get used to it." Eli's mouth twitched into a real smile, this time small, rare, but real. Later, back at the Hart house, the town gathered for a potluck dinner in the yard, long tables set up under string lights. Lena moved through the crowd with a tray of pie slices, laughing, talking, feeling like she belonged. Eli watched her from near the porch, a quiet steadiness in his posture. When Lena came to him, he took her hand and pulled her close. "What?" she asked, smiling. Eli's voice came low. "You look like home." Lena's eyes burned because that word home had felt impossible a few months ago. She whispered, "You did that." Eli shook his head slightly. "No. You did. You stayed." Lena swallowed hard. Eli's gaze held hers. "I'm going to build that fence line next week. The one June always wanted fixed." Lena blinked. "You're doing it now?" Eli nodded. "Yeah." Lena's chest warmed. "Can I help?" Eli's mouth twitched. "You'll probably hit your thumb with a hammer." Lena narrowed her eyes. "Rude." Eli's gaze softened. "But, yeah." "You can help." Lena leaned into him, voice quiet. "And after?" Eli's eyes stayed on hers. Steady and sure. "After," he said, "we keep building. Together. If you want." Lena whispered, "I want." Eli's thumb brushed lightly over her hand. "Good." The string lights glowed above them. Laughter rose around them. The prairie stretched wide and endless beyond the yard, holding their small town like a secret. Lena looked at Eli and felt something inside her open like a door. Not a perfect life, not a life without risk, but a life that felt honest, warm, and chosen. And when Eli leaned down and kissed her soft, meaningful, almost surprised, Lena kissed him back like she wasn't afraid anymore. Not because fear was gone, but because love was bigger. If you want more slow-burn cowboy romances where healing feels like coming home, subscribe and turn on notifications.